This is episode 4 of the Gold Standard here on Fox 19 Now. Joe Danneman and Charlie Goldsmith talking Bengals and Reds, and we'll begin episode 4 with what everybody in Cincinnati and nationally is talking about. In fact, I just finished up a call with Sirius XM NFL Radio talking about Shemar Stewart and what's happening with the Bengals' first-round pick. I will open the floor to you, Charlie Goldsmith. What's your take on what's going on with Shemar Stewart?
You have to start with the track record and the history of the Bengals, to where every contract negotiation, with the exception of maybe Ted Karras's extension last year, every one of them has felt more difficult than they've needed to be. And that creates almost an expectation going into even something as routine as a rookie contract, that the process won't be easy. That's kind of the reputation the Bengals have built. But also, it's not uncommon or it's actually kind of common for rookie contracts to not be signed at this point. The fact that they haven't agreed and negotiated to that point, to me, that's not the story. The story is how Stewart's approached this through his comments, how he's approached this through not practicing. All of that is a very bold, aggressive stance for a player who obviously is inexperienced in his career. How he's handling this makes you wonder the type of advice he's getting, the feedback that he's getting, the people who are impacting the decisions that he's making. Obviously, that starts with himself. How that process works for a 21-year-old who is out on such a limb, even though we can talk about the contracts and the negotiations, but that side of it is what is the most different here.
Were you surprised by his comments?
I was even more surprised that he left on Thursday. But of course, the fact that, he said the thing, right? The fact that the Bengals are so worried about winning negotiations over games, that you have to wonder if the reputation that he's heard about, that he's picked up on, fair or unfair, that the reputation that he's clearly aware of because he was reiterating that line, you have to wonder if that's impacting his stance here as well, making him feel like he needs to be more aggressive to make a point because he knows he's dealing with an organization that has such a history of handling negotiations in specific ways. It's not the thing anyone wants, but it's just where the Bengals are right now because Shemar is dug in on doing something that rookies don't do, and because the Bengals are working on a new type of contract structure.
We all anticipate at some point this will get taken care of, and Shemar Stewart will be a Cincinnati Bengal. So when that happens, how critical was it that he missed the offseason and now mandatory camp as far as the on-field work? He went to all the meetings up until the final day when they left for the 5-week break before training camp, but how big of a deal is it that he didn't get that time on the field?
Now, the Bengals can work around it. Zach Taylor pointed out today that in 2020, they didn't even have any summer stuff and they were fine. You have guys who deal with injuries at this point of year and then just get worked into training camp. And sometimes, most of the time, it ends up being okay. But Shemar's in a different position for 2 reasons. One, when you look at the delineation between Myles Murphy, Joseph Ossai, and who Shemar Stewart is right now, I don't know that there's a big gap between those 3 players. And one of them is going to be a starter running out of the tunnel. The other is going to be the 4th guy. And it's 3 guys very closely stacked together who could go in any different order. So any small head start that one gets over the other makes a difference. 2 is the fact that it's the type of defensive line coaching that they're getting. Joseph Ossai told me he's seeing a lot of the young guys struggle with the specific techniques and tendencies and approach and system that Jerry Montgomery is working to create, the Bengals' new line coach. I'll say it again, like Ossai said, guys are getting frustrated by this, but it'll pay off down the road. And so you like to work through that now. And if the guys working through that now are in a spot where they have an advantage over Shemar, well, that'll factor into this in September as well.
Well, this all comes under the umbrella of the Cincinnati Bengals and the emphasis all offseason. And now as we're on the doorstep of training camp, of getting off to a fast start. It's what's come back to bite them the last 2 seasons of not making the playoffs and coming oh so close. Zach Taylor was asked some questions about that in his final press availability before the end of minicamp. What was your takeaway on what Zach Taylor said? And look, he can talk all he wants about the idea of getting off to a fast start. What have you noticed tangibly, or what do you think is in the plans for this team to rectify that and play better football in September?
I think take actions better than words, and just look at the Bengals' pure training camp schedule. There is a stack of practices and then 3 days off and then the Eagles game. I think that's going to be a very important window. The practices leading into that, giving them time, and then, all right, starters, here you go, here's your opportunity. I think that's going to be a game where Zach asks for a lot of the guys. It'll be a different approach than they've handled those preseason games, and there's kind of that window on the schedule for the Bengals to use that Philadelphia game in that way. Now, the Bengals' slow start problem as a whole, like I've said this previously, the defense hasn't been playing its worst games at the start of the season. Also, the Bengals have had a very old defense over the last couple of years. Now they have a very young defense. So the problems that led to their struggles last year will be completely different to any problems that could lead to any struggles this year. So it's continuing to refresh and adapt. And really the key to me starting fast is making even more significant changes, not from a schedule perspective, but from a personnel perspective, to your personnel, as you install a new defense and try to get these young kids up to speed in a new system. That's completely different stuff than Lou Anarumo had to deal with last year, but how Al Golden manages that on a daily basis, that'll go a long way here.
Zach Taylor is on the record that this team will play its starters in the preseason. We'll find out more how much as we get closer to those dates. You and I have discussed that briefly in this forum, the Gold Standard podcast. Do you think that's the right play by the Bengals to put Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, the other stars out there in preseason games, getting snaps before the start of the regular season?
I always go here. Put yourself, Burrow's got the ball in his hands dropping back against Philadelphia. Do you really want to be in that situation? I think Burrow and the offense are in such a strong spot to start fast regardless that I don't think this is an offense that needs time in the preseason. I think this is an offense that's ready to roll, that has an astounding amount of continuity, that's specifically set up to start the season fast without feeling any of the necessary risk of playing your guys in the preseason. Now, the defense, they've got work to do. They've got communication to work out. There will be more communication on the field this year. I think that young group really would benefit from some time, but the offense as a whole, do you really want Burrow dropping back with a rush in his face in a time that's not really necessary? That's not how I see it, but the Bengals are going in that direction.
I'm with you. The risk-reward here, to me, isn't worth it, because if a Joe Burrow or a Jamar Chase or a T. Higgins were to get hurt in the preseason, the fan base would never forgive the organization for that happening and wasting what would be another year of Joe Burrow's prime. Joe Burrow spoke this week at length about himself, about his teammates. He talked about Shemar Stewart and Trey Hendrickson and the idea of trying to maneuver through training camp with distractions. He spoke at length. What was your biggest takeaway from what Joe said?
Real quick, I have one more thing about the slow starts.
Yeah.
If the Bengals beat the Browns and Jaguars, we won't be doing the show saying, man, aren't you glad Burrow played in the preseason? No, it'll be Burrow's awesome. They had a great game plan, and they're set up to roll. Now, that ties into go ahead.
But wouldn't you say if they started 0-2, why didn't they play them in the preseason after every data point they've had the last couple of years leading up to it? So you can see where it's kind of one of those things
you got me there.
It depends what side of the fence you're on. I'm with you. The risk reward, again, is not worth it, considering how long of a season it is, and the emphasis that Zach Taylor's always had on this team being fresh at the end of the season. However, that only matters if you make it to the postseason. They cannot afford to get off to a slow start. Zach Taylor, I don't want to say Zach Taylor's on a hot seat, but certainly he's got some urgency. He's got some urgency. He's under a microscope this year, and the biggest thing he had to change was twofold. Get the defense better. He made the big change with Lou Anarumo. Number two, get off to a faster start. And the biggest stone they haven't turned over is playing their starters more time in the preseason. So I understand where Zach's coming from. And we have to understand, too, they're having these same conversations about risk, reward of playing these guys. And they've ultimately decided that this is going to happen. No matter how much we talk about it, they're going to do it. Now, the question is, will it make a difference? That reward, is that reward worth the risk? We'll find out.
And when you look at really why they've lost, like Burrow's just played terribly. And
it's always because he's coming back from something.
Always because he's coming back from something. I just have more confidence that Burrow's in a better spot to be firing at all cylinders week one than he's ever been. And that you mentioned earlier, like takeaways from what Burrow's saying, combine that with what we saw from Burrow during OTAs and minicamp. Something's happened here. Like, there's a leap I see that's been made. I think the story of his season is going to be, last year the story of his season was all these off-schedule explosive plays that he was flipping around. I think this year what it's going to be is, yes, they'll have that element, but I think also you'll see him just drop back and fire. Like, I think you're going to see some of those strikes. I think his fastball has something extra to it, and it's going to this season. I think that's going to be the detail we're noticing. It'll be a highlight reel of Burrow, even getting the ball out faster sometimes, and then just making a window throw over the middle where you're like, how do you get the ball there?
I think the highlight reel of Joe Burrow fans want to see is him handing the ball off in the fourth quarter more. And Zach Taylor talked about that at the end of minicamp as well, that if they can get a defense that can give them at least a breather, that they don't have to score 40 points every game, that Joe Burrow won't have to put up the same numbers. But I think the wow plays might be even bigger this year for Joe Burrow. You talked about what he said, twofold here. First of all, Joe Burrow is all in on the preseason. He talked about it himself, about playing. He said it's a completely different animal, that once you get into a game as opposed to practice, he says everything feels sped up to me once I get into a game as opposed to being in practice. So you can understand why he would want that before the start of the season. Maybe that can help him get off to a faster start. But I also liked what he said, and he's always said this, that he's a player who takes what the defense gives him. Whatever the defense is saying to throw the ball, wherever they're saying to throw the ball, he throws the ball. And that's where he's talking about now the development of Andre Yoshivas, Charlie Jones, Jermaine Burton. We know what T and Jamar are about, what they can do. But I found it fascinating. He said that the secondary receivers, the Andres, the Jermaines, the Charlie Jones, that these guys are learning to take what they see in the playbook and are able to creatively maneuver defenses depending on what they throw at them. They can go off script a little bit more. Get creative is what he says. How big of a difference would that be? We know what he is with Jamar and T if he kind of gets that. And we've seen it with Andre. That's when Andre's at his best, right? Is when he's going off script, when he's getting creative with Joe. If they can add that with Jermaine, if Charlie Jones can get that, boy, it feels like an offense that's already one of the best in the NFL could even take a step higher.
And the names you haven't mentioned who are doing that more than anyone are Mike Gesicki, their tight end, and Chase Brown, their running back. Let me tell you about the Mike G sail. The Mike G sail it's a sail route which kind of splits out. But then the Mike G sail, what makes it different is when you run that route against zone, Mike has done such a good job of figuring out how to kind of sit in the soft, shallow spot of the defense. He said earlier in his career, he said Ryan Fitzpatrick, former Bengal, taught him how to do it. They were teammates in Miami, and Gesicki said that Fitzpatrick would say, dude, just stop in the open space. And Gesicki would be like, I don't know, man. The coaches are telling me to do this. I'm just going to do what the picture is. And he wanted to please the coaches. I get that. But he's at a point of his career, and he's at a point with his relationship and trust and being on the same page with the vision between the coaching staff and Burrow, where he is so good at the Mike G sail, which is stopping and just finding a spot. How he described it was, you know how Travis Kelce's always wide open?
Yeah.
Well, I want that to be me.
Yeah.
And then I was talking to Andre Yoshivas about his favorite play that he made. I talked to him before he had that crazy play down the field, so I'm sure that superseded it. But he said his favorite play was he ran the Mike G sail, and he did it. So it's all these guys who have the feel for open space and soft spots. And I can tell you the coaching staff spent a lot of time this offseason. What do we do when teams double T and double Jamar? And it's these types of concepts that can unlock another layer of dangerousness for the offense.
Okay, before we move on to the Reds, one final question here about the Bengals. Training camp is on deck, five weeks away. What will be the number one storyline outside of Shemar Stewart and Trey Hendrickson and what's going on with them? What will be the number one football storyline you're looking forward to at Bengals training camp?
The Chase Brown breakout train. Well, he's already broken out, but the Chase Brown hype train is about to take off significantly. Chase Brown is going to be one of the most popular jersey sellers.
Yeah.
Chase Brown's going to be not just the guy that if you're like the smart, cool Bengals fan you're talking about. Chase Brown's going to be, the guys that kids are on the playground trying to recreate the move that he did. I think he's positioning himself to have that type of platform, not to be on a Jamar Chase, T. Higgins level, but to be, say, as famous as Joe Mixon and Tyler Boyd were, to something pretty close to that with the opportunity, with the talent, with the way the scheme is evolving around him. There are some big ideas for Chase, and I think we're going to be spending a lot of time saying what Chase Brown does for the Bengals offense is just a lot of fun.
I don't believe you're a fantasy football player.
I'm not.
Sounds like Chase Brown for the first round is what Charlie Goldsmith is saying. I mean, you're talking about first rounders. Certainly Jamar's a first rounder. You're talking about the Saquon Barkleys of the world. You think Chase Brown could be a guy that has 1,500 total yards, double-digit touchdowns this coming season?
He had like 990 yards in 16 games last year, and they weren't even giving him a shot until week 7. And again, I think Dan Pitcher said this the other day. He was kind of getting the ball not on accident, but kind of by default. Right? You've got to. Now they're saying, how can we get Chase Brown the ball consistently, regularly, frequently, in ways that are most well set up for him to succeed? He'll probably take away some touches from Jamar and T, and of course we'll go back to those guys at the end of the games. But to be able to have that type of near star level player in Chase Brown, I think that's going to be something that gets everyone extremely excited.
We transition now to the Reds, and I'll do this because we do it every week. We've talked about your ceiling and the number. We established week 1 of this show that you thought the Reds ceiling was 88 wins. They've had a nice week, so we're taping this on Thursday after the Reds won the Ohio Cup, won the series in Cleveland, coming off a sweep of the Arizona Diamondbacks, so they've had a nice week. Where's your thermometer right now? It went down last week from 88 to, I think, 85 as the ceiling. What's your ceiling today?
All right, let's give him 86. Let's give him another win.
Bump him up.
Here's what I heard. There was a lot of conversations coming off. It's all right. When we had this conversation a week ago, I talked about how things were feeling pretty bleak, both short-term and long-term with the Reds, in a way that kind of felt different. Well, coming off that Brewers series, there were a lot of in-the-clubhouse conversations that the Reds were having about how we need to be on the top step of the dugout. The energy and the vocal nature that you needed to see from the team, the players were telling each other, we need more of that. And then the Reds against the Diamondbacks, kind of what went under the radar was they grinded out those wins. You know, they weren't technically late-game comebacks, but they grinded all of those out late. And usually I'm an analytical guy. I'm not here to say that they won because they were on the top step of the dugout. But when you're 0-21, when you're down late in games, it certainly doesn't hurt. And I think the intangible kind of relief and the joy you're seeing from McClain, I think he looks a lot more enthusiastic and just there's weight off him, and that's showing up with his defense. Christian, this is emotion, Encarnacion Strand. This is the most emotion I've ever seen from him.
I agree.
As a player. I think a lot of it comes from TJ Friedl, and kind of all eyes are on him and how he plays the game. I think Ellie's a part of that with how he plays every day. There's a nice energy that if they can kind of package up, that's what the identity of this team should be going forward.
So in the next month, we're going to decide who's in the All-Star game. I think we're both in agreement that kind of the placement of the Reds right now, they're likely to get 2 max players in the All-Star game, maybe 3.
Maybe
Certainly
3, maybe 1, we'll see.
They have 3 guys that feel like they're candidates. Can you power rank for me Ellie, Friedl, Abbott as far as you would go for their All-Star game resume?
Well, if we're just going off resumes, and I'll start with Ellie. Ellie would be 3rd as a resume perspective. I will say Ellie's had a very good season. Not great, but I think he's still, 25th-ish in WAR in the National League. He's still a very much above average hitter. He's still a dynamic base stealer, even though he was limited for a stretch because he was battling a couple little minor tweaks. He's played every day, and that adds to your overall value for a team. He's scoring it feels like half the Reds' runs, and he's driving in, it feels like the other half. So Ellie also, I think the league will want to have in the All-Star game.
Yeah, it's a showcase game.
I think Ellie kind of has that platform that will give him that opportunity. Now, hopefully that doesn't take away from TJ Friedl getting an opportunity, because I think TJ's been the best player this season. I think it's a cliche, but just a spark that he catalyzes with just the way that he plays. He can pull the inside pitch. He can do something simple and take the outside pitch the other way. The bunt game works so well for him. What he does at the wall, there's just a fearlessness for him that is truly why you watch baseball, for players who play the game the right way like Friedl. And then Abbott's just been one of the best pitchers in the National League this season, so definitely some deserving candidates. I would rank them as all-stars just on paper: Friedl, Abbott, Ellie. But Ellie's also had a very good season, and I do expect the league will put him in the game. Yeah,
so the resume, as you put it, has Friedl, Abbott, Ellie. Resume versus reality is Ellie for sure is going to be a Reds all-star. And then would you say, who do you think is more likely from the public or the people voting to put in Abbott or Friedl?
I think a part of this, too, is there's just a lot of competition in the outfield.
Yeah, sure.
I know even for the starter spots, and I don't have the whole ballot memorized, but I know for the starter spots, there's a nice fun debate all right, Corbin Carroll, Juan Soto, Kyle Tucker, Pete Crow, Armstrong, and James Wood are all having awesome seasons, and that's wow, who are you going to go? That's a fun debate to have at home with your baseball friends right now, who starts among that group. And you're even seeing takes that is Juan Soto going to be an all-star this year? And now his numbers are down, but he's still Juan Soto. So that's the competition level in the outfield. it's a much easier path in the starting rotation, especially when you look at the fact of how many pitchers are hurt in any given season, and that's especially true with starters this year. That probably would give Abbott a bit of an edge.
Is Chase Burns going to pitch for the Reds this year?
Well, they're managing his innings, and if you're managing his innings, you're managing them for something. So, all right, if you had asked me last year, will Rhett Lauder pitch for the Reds this year? I would have said probably not, but then he did because there was a need that Lauder filled, and then he ran with the opportunity. He was ready. The Reds are keeping open the opportunity for Chase Burns to pitch for the Reds. I think if this team's really good, I think there's a very good chance that Chase Burns could end up in their bullpen by the end of the season. But we'll see how these needs emerge. They could get forced into something where they have to call him up, just like they had to call up Rhett Lauder last year. But he is on maybe not a strict innings limit, but a framework of innings that they'd like to see him throw this year. So they can't just drop him in right now and turn him loose to pitch 7 innings every 5 days. But there are plans and conversations in place about how can, if the timing is right, Chase Burns impact the Reds. Because, I mean, he can get outs in the big leagues right now, that's for sure.
Correct me if I'm wrong. The 5 best arms in the organization: Hunter Green, Andrew Abbott, Nick Lodolo, Chase Burns, Rhett Lauder. Is that the top 5?
Yeah.
How would you rank those 5?
In terms of long-term, let's say like trade value, like value or like contract extension value?
Just value of talent, production, and
for the long run.
Correct, for the long run, projecting what they will be if they hit their ceiling. Is Hunter one?
Yeah, I'm going to start with Hunter.
Hunter's one.
The injuries are a part of this. But if the Reds are ever going to do this, what they need, they're going to face the Dodgers, right? If they're ever going to do this, they need someone who's just going to be able to shut down Ohtani and Betts and Freeman and all those guys. I don't know that Hunter will do that, but Hunter has a much better chance to do that than probably all but 5 pitchers in the league. So I would like to roll my dice with Hunter, which to me makes Hunter the most valuable of this group. Now, number 2, Chase Burns.
That's where I was going with this. Chase Burns is the 2nd most valuable arm in this organization.
The velocity is real. The slider's even better. He's really, I feel like his 3rd and 4th pitches are farther along than Green's and Lodolos were at that stage of their career. He's just, I mean, watch him like in the college baseball postseason. There's just like this, and I'm sticking out my chest, nature to him. And Hunter has a lot of that as well. But you've seen that from Burns from a young age. I love that about him. Now, I am going to have Lodolo 3, too, which is controversial. I think that upside, like I mentioned with Hunter, going up against the Dodgers, I think that upside, once he really figures out getting that curveball back to what it can be, gives him a ceiling from a swing and miss perspective that Abbott doesn't have. And I do value swing and miss more as I project long-term. But I do have Burns pretty comfortably as number 2. I mean, this is one of the most talented pitchers anywhere. He's not that far behind Paul Skeens. I'm not trying to go there, but like just in terms of the pace he's on and what he's accomplished and how the stuff looks, like there's a lot here that the Reds have to make sure they get right.
Now we go to the Gold Rush. This is when I hit Charlie with some rapid fire questions. Fun idea this week for the Gold Rush. It's going to be season in a sentence. So I'm going to give you a name, a big name player or coach for the Bengals and the Reds, and I want you to imagine you're writing the end of season story about this player and what will be the top line for that player, okay? Season in a sentence to start the Gold Rush. Joe Burrow.
He did it again. Joe Burrow kind of still gets taken for granted what he did in 2024. He's going to, I think, recreate and build on that level. But then there's kind of, I think, going to be a 2021 element of this season for him as well, inspiring belief and overcoming and helping solve or help propel or take the Bengals away from questions that still exist from a roster perspective, from a front office, from a management perspective. I think Joe Burrow's talent will help distract and guide the Bengals out of that, much like he did in 2021. So I think we'll have another great year and do it again.
Season in a sentence, Jamar Chase.
Doing more with less. I don't think Jamar's going to win the Triple Crown again this year. The Bengals, their vision is they want to use the run game more. They want to not be in spots where they're down by 14 points and have to throw the ball all over the lot because they're in desperate comeback mode. That will reduce his stats to some extent. But in the red zone, over the middle of the field, Jamar is still going to be making magic, and that's always fun to watch.
Season in a sentence, T. Higgins.
For T. Higgins, I'm going to go with more than before, just in terms of I think he's going to continue to have like lining up in the slot.
Yeah.
I think he's going to motion more. They're going to try to build more of that. Having, hopefully, T. Higgins available to practice more, having T. Higgins under a more normal week-to-week schedule can help just T be in a more normal spot to be able to expand his role and build on what he's done.
You need to put these headlines in your notebook and hold on to them. These are
Who
some
says
good
I
ones.
don't?
Yes, I will not say that because I know you do. Zach Taylor, season in a sentence.
Head coach, not a play caller. I think Zach Taylor has done he will still call the plays.
Sure.
Zach Taylor has done an unbelievable job designing the offense around Burrow. What this year is about is developing a new wave of leadership on the roster. It's about avoiding or minimizing the impact of distractions. It's about overseeing the vision of a new defense where there are a lot of roles like, is Josh Newton going to start? I don't know. Well, Zach Taylor kind of has to sort through all of that because so many guys could play. There's a lot of head coach stuff he has to do this year that's on his plate.
Switching to the Reds now, season in a sentence for Elly De La Cruz.
He's become underrated. We were all expecting Elly to have the Bobby Witt season that Bobby Witt had last year where it's all right, he is one of the 5 best players in baseball now. While that hasn't happened, he's still really good. I think you've seen a lot of growth from him in terms of the stuff he's done to play every day. The way he's battled this season has earned him a lot of respect, has made a big impact behind the scenes. There's still a lot of cool stuff that he's done, and the production's been strong.
Last one here, and I'm getting up in my seat because I can't wait for this answer. Season in a sentence for Andrew Abbott is?
I said this to Joe earlier. Joe is right.
Yes.
You've been on the All-Star train for a while now.
What do you think's been the difference? What's taken his game to this level that he could go to Cleveland and throw a complete game shutout?
So here's the thing. We've seen this before from Abbott.
We have.
Abbott had an unbelievable start to 2023, unbelievable start to 2024, and then he fell off a cliff down the stretch. He has changed the way he's changed his diet. He has changed the way he manages conditioning between starts. He's gotten into much better shape. He's changed the way he takes care of his arm because he had some shoulder stuff last year. Like, he has done a lot of that stuff in the what this season's always been about for him is August and September, and he has never been so confident that he'll be able to be the Andrew Abbott we're seeing now at the end.
Likeable guy, fun guy to be around. I think a lot of people who are from my generation think back to 1990 and Jack Armstrong and the great first half of the season he had. He was the team's ace. He went to the All-Star game, and then it fell off in the second half of the season. Look, the Reds still won the World Series that year, but we've seen that with Andrew Abbott before, and I've said that reminds me a little bit of Jack Armstrong, who had the great first half and just couldn't complete it. We'll see if he can take it to the finish line this year. We'll finish off this episode with the Gold Nugget, one of my favorite segments on this show. This is where we dive into Charlie's notebook. Your Gold Nugget is on a story you're working on about a hero from the Bengals Super Bowl run. You think back to that AFC Championship game, one of the biggest plays of the year was Samaje Perine's long touchdown to get the Bengals a sigh of relief that they're in this game, they've got a shot. What are you working on with Samaje?
Well, Samaje, and that was the tease, that this was about Samaje. But really, don't worry, this is about Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes. I was talking to Samaje about the experience of going to Kansas City.
Yeah.
And he said what was so incredible was that was such a freelance offense where Mahomes and Kelsey seemingly were making stuff up on the fly. And he said, as a guy coming in, I didn't even really get caught up to any of that. And here's where it gets interesting, though. Because then he said he got to Cincinnati and he looks around and he's doing OTAs and he goes, wait, we're doing this now? Because Samaje was the check down guy,
sure,
right? Throw the ball back to the running back, get 5 yards. And he appreciated that. That gave him a nice living. But he said the fun that Burrow is having testing himself is a lot more Mahomes-esque. And I mean, who's a better expert on Mahomes versus Burrow than the guy who's now played with both of them? So that comment really caught my eye from a background guy in Samaje Perine, but a similarity he's seeing of Burrow looking more like Patrick Mahomes.
So we're going to see that story on Charlie's Chalkboard.
It's already up on Fox 19.
There it is. Fox19.com/sports. Find Charlie's Chalkboard. It's got its own tab right there on the website. He's updating some of the best work in all of Cincinnati. You laugh, you smile, it's the truth. Every single day, it seems he's got a new article up there that I read that you should read as well on Charlie's Chalkboard. And make sure to check out the Gold Standard right here, streaming platforms. It's also in podcast forms wherever you get your podcast. I listen to it on Apple Podcast, and it's nice and neat. We got the great artwork and everything. So this thing's taking off. 4 episodes in. We're back next week for episode 5 as we now take a break from the Bengals at least them being here, but we never take a break from talking about the Bengals on the Gold Standard. Charlie Goldsmith, I'm Joe Danneman. We'll talk to you next week.